Am I audible, Lalaram?
Yes, sir. Hello.
Okay, I'm extremely sorry for the delay. There is an internet issue here in my office. I was unable to get connected. Now I am joining through my mobile net. Maybe it may have some issues. Please bear with me. Is my presentation visible now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I'm extremely sorry for the delay. So in this session, I will give a brief overview about these three important domain knowledge concepts: speech production, speech perception, and speech cognition. Essentially, to this information, I would like to bring out, put forward some suggestions saying that we can indeed use some of the cognitive speech processing knowledge that is available in the literature to develop some important speech analysis and processing methods. So that is the goal of this presentation. I have organized my presentation in the following way. So I'll give a brief introduction, then I'll explain about the speech communication process, production process, perception process, cognition process. Then, for example, after an extensive study of speech production process, many speech analysis methods have been developed based on the nature of speech production. Similarly, there are approaches that have been developed by exploiting speech perception, specifically when I say by exploiting the functioning of the peripheral auditory system. Then I will also say how the speech analysis based on speech cognition can be viewed from this learned knowledge. So that is the way I have organized my presentation. Of course, this I might have briefly mentioned somewhere. When I go to the current stage of when we are doing end-to-end systems building, where is the scope for speech processing community who are heavily dependent on signal processing knowledge, and they were working on speech signal processing to develop methods. All our attempts as speech signal processing experts was on what is called feature engineering, and versus now, if the features are directly learned by the deep learning models, that is termed as representation learning. Okay, so now this is what is happening currently when we are building end-to-end system. Everything we are raw data, we are feeding it to the deep learning models. They will discover some nonlinear representations in the first few hidden layers of the deep learning models, which we call it as representation learning, which are nothing but non-linearly processed features. And these features are used in further layers for pattern discovery. So thus, there seems to be no scope for feature engineering from that point of view. The where we had a glorified field in using speech signal processing, that seemed to be not the case, at least when you go to the development of standard speech technologies like speech recognition, speaker recognition, language recognition. Of course, before this deep learning came, if we look into the weakness of the machine learning algorithms, the machine learning algorithms can discover the patterns that are present in the given data points without being explicitly programmed on what pattern to look for. Alternatively, so as a result of that, feature engineering was the main front end. Essentially, it is speech signal processing based on digital signal processing. It used to take the benefit of human experience and the domain knowledge of the human expert to come up with feature representations which will compensate for the weakness of the machine learning algorithms. When you take any of the machine learning algorithms like support vector machine, Gaussian mixture model, hidden Markov model, even shallow neural networks, the depth of the model was not that, so that it will not have that bandwidth to discover the features by itself first. So as a result of that, we need to first pass the raw data through a feature engineering block, which we call pre-processing block, pre-processing and feature extraction block, which will, based on the signal processing algorithms you are using, it will extract relevant features, and those relevant features are termed as data points for machine learning. Okay. Now, for the fields like speech, image processing, and those things where natural language processing, where we have the domain knowledge, that way of feature engineering is okay. Whereas with the very expanding scope of machine learning aided by deep learning, every new area, application area, may not have the luxury of this domain knowledge. So that is where people thought about, can we avoid this feature engineering block? That is where the concept of representation learning came by deep learning, from the deep learning field. And if you see the representation learning, of course, now what deep learning community, when we use for speech technology development, we say that, okay, first few layers in the deep learning models will learn the representation by nonlinear processing. What I'm mentioning is this representation learning can be motivated from some of the concepts that are available in the cognitive speech processing. Okay, so if that happens, then we will be able to better interpret the representations that are being learned by the deep learning model. So that is the wish list under which I am projecting the points here. Of course, we had this approach before 2010 or 2012, before this deep learning came. We were designing handcrafted acoustic features based on domain knowledge. Domain knowledge means essentially speech communication, production, and peripheral auditory processing, that is speech perception. Based on that, we come up with a set of acoustic feature extraction algorithms. So pass the raw speech signal through that feature extraction algorithm, get the relevant features, and design efficient machine learning models to make prediction and classification. That is what is the journey we are all making. Okay, this I told the drawbacks of manual feature engineering, or we call handcrafting. It's a very cumbersome and needs domain knowledge. And the other thing is, even though I have domain knowledge, the other negative point is the features that we are extracting is driven more by the algorithmic nature rather than capturing all the different rich information that is present in the speech signals. That means to say, the features that we are extracting may not be the best for that particular task which we are doing. For example, if we consider, some of us have come through that journey, that starting from 1980s, Mel frequency capsular coefficient ruled the speech processing field. For almost all tasks, we used to take Mel frequency capsular coefficient. Of course, it was giving good performance, but when somebody asks a question, is it a best feature for speech recognition? Which is the best feature for speaker recognition? Is it a best feature for LID? There is no concrete answer for that. Yes, it's a vocal tract system information representation. You can use it like that, we used to say. But here, with this representation learning, it may be possible that we can learn these intermediate representations of speech automatically that best suits for that particular task. Okay. And while doing that representation learning, we may exploit some of the ideas that are present in the cognitive speech processing literature, which may give us clue on how to organize the spectrotemporal information. That is one direction. For example, if you look into the recent literature on representation learning, they have told there may be different ways of constructing spectrograms. One simple way is short-term Fourier transform. People have done MEL-based spectrogram or gamma tone-based spectrogram. So different ways of modifying the spectrotemporal energy. The cognitive speech processing approaches may also give us additional clues on organizing this spectrotemporal information, which may benefit the representation learning process. So that is one direction where cognitive speech processing approaches may help us. And also, suppose I layer by layer, when it is learning, when I get the representations in the two-dimensional space, in effect 3-dimension like a spectrogram, if there is a repeatable pattern that is coming from each layers of learning, we can use some of our knowledge from or the information available in the cognitive speech processing literature to interpret or explain what is being learned in the intermediate layers. Okay, so that is how this cognitive speech processing can really come in hand for this representation learning subfield in the deep learning, which will help us to interpret what is being learned in the few hidden layers. Coming to the speech communication area, all of us have experienced this, that if I consider human-human communication, here it is essentially the information exchange between two cognitive systems, A and E, which is marked in the slide. But that goes through this channel. The talker, cognitive system of the talker will send the neuromuscular commands to speech production system B of the talker. And accordingly, the speech production system of the talker gets modulating the air exhaling out of the lungs, which results in acoustic pressure variations available as acoustic version of the speech signal in the external environment. That comes to the ear of the listener, which is shown as D. And from the ear, as I showed in the yesterday's pictures, from the cochlea, the spectrotemporal bioechoed potential will go into the cognitive system, the auditory cortex of the listener, and where the message comprehension, the perception and message comprehension takes place. Okay, so that is what happens. So when we are talking about cognitive speech processing, what we are focusing is on A and E. What happens in A, what happens in E. That is what is the functionality of the auditory cortex. Whereas most of our understanding currently, of course, people are working in this area as cognitive speech processing, but it is a separate community-like thing. Whereas most of us, what we are doing is BCD. Only BCD we have learned enough literature, is a domain knowledge is available. Based on that, we have developed several speech analysis methods. What is proposed here is, can we have some more knowledge about what happens at A and what happens at E, and use that knowledge to come up with better representation learning approaches. So that is the one direction where we can really extend our current direction of work in the speech analysis area to that part. Again, that is expanded here. If I go for speech chain, what happens here? So the vocal muscle, speech production system, and the ear, these things are well studied. Okay, and we have models for that. But what we are cognitive speech processing, we are looking is in the listener brain and the talker brain or speaker brain, how the cognitive auditory cortex part works. Based on that, can we develop some models for representation? Okay, so that is what is the goal here. I think this I mentioned earlier also, that the speech production system and the speech perception system, peripheral auditory system, which is human ear, these are well understood. So it is like a white box. We have no problem in no ambiguity in terms of how the speech production takes place, no ambiguity in terms of how the acoustic signal gets converted into spectro-temporal representation in the speech perception system. What we have is the problem here is the black box part. That is the least understood part is this cognitive system. So how do I now better understand the phenomenon that is happening in the cognitive systems? Even if there is a small finding coming from there, that may give us a very good step change in representation learning of the speech signal. So as I will mention about some of those such results which are coming in production and perception knowledge. Same way we can try to see from the cognitive system point of view also. Of course, if you consider the deep learning field, as many of us are working for the last few years, it is mostly data driven. When it is data driven, you need more data, more complex deep learning models, more computing infrastructure you have in terms of both software and hardware. With all these are provided, you are expected to get the better performance. So that is how the significantly better performance have been achieved by the deep learning models. Even though complex model architecture sees the deep learning contribution, but more than that, equal contribution also comes from availability of the more data, more computing infrastructure. Okay, that is also we need to give equal. But the advantage of this, once you ensure these components in the data-driven system, you get a good performance. That we have seen in most of the speech technologies we have developed. The issue is now domain, when it's coming to the domain knowledge in the deep learning field, you just know how to use that software package and you have the data. You can indeed develop a system. So in that way, the plus point is it has become from domain to domain agnostic, the speech processing field. That's why the last few years there are many speech tech startups and companies have come into this field so that you can cash on the market what is available. And fortunately, we have timely GPU infrastructure available, and open source toolkits are being developed and made it available for community by different research groups. Then so all these 3 points shows that this domain knowledge thing which we are trying earlier using feature engineering and machine learning, they may not be very much useful now or may not be relevant now. What is there to do in the deep learning arena? But what is believed here is this data-driven approach by the deep learning models versus the domain knowledge that are being carried out earlier may complement each other. For example, the feature extraction, especially this cognitive speech processing, may help in understanding and interpretation of the deep learning systems, especially different layers of learning, how that visual representation if you construct, whether something relevant is happening like analogous to what is being found out in the cognitive system. That may give us an idea for justifying things. Then the other thing is, see, this data-driven approach may yield better features and hence improved performance. That is we have seen in the deep learning. So the same thing can be exploited. For example, when I want to study some cognitive speech processing phenomenon, we can flip the direction that you take enough amount of data and try to derive some cognitive phenomenon with the help of this data-driven approach. So we can take the benefit of deep learning to derive some of the cognitively specified representations, which are we used to connect probes and try to take the data. Whether such representation can be indirectly developed by this data-driven approach, and accordingly, these are one is contributing to the other. The cognitive speech processing will help us to better interpret what is learned in the intermediate layers of DL system. Otherwise, I can also use the data-driven approach to come up with some representations which are equivalent to that of the cognitive speech processing representations. So then that is a simulation way of getting the cognitive speech processing representation. Then for example, this data-driven approach now we are doing already, even though we don't call them as cognitive speech processing tasks, but indirectly we are doing, as I explained in the last session, that if I want to distinguish between two different noise sources, synthetic and this one, or I want to find out whether a person has learned the concept properly or not. For example, all of us have experienced it. Suppose as faculty or teaching assistants or something, suppose if I am asking a question to one of my student, depending on the response that person is giving, I will be able to judge saying that, no, okay, he has a clarity on the concept, or he may not have. But it's a cognitively, it's a simple task for me because of my trained cognitive system. But can we derive or develop automatic systems to do that? That is where this data-driven approach can indeed be exploited for doing some such cognitive speech processing tasks. At least I see these three broad direction at this point of time where we can benefit from the rich literature available in the cognitive speech processing area. Of course, if you go for speech production system, we have learned this, these vocal folds act as the major excitation source, and the oral cavity and nasal cavity will act as two resonant cavities, and these moving articulators will act as a time-varying time-varying components which will change the dimension of the vocal tract, which results in the time-varying non-stationary speech signal to be generated. That equivalently modeled in a mechanical model, like lungs are treated as muscles, muscle force, where the lungs exhales out, and these are walls representing the vocal cords, and there are three resonant chambers. One is pharyngeal cavity, nasal cavity, oral cavity, and this velum again acts as the nozzle. So with that, this is a mechanical model. If I want to build a mechanical system for generating the speech, I can exploit it. Similarly, in the electrical engineering, we have exploited this. That is that after studying this speech production process, one mechanical model, the other one is the electrical model for speech production, two-stage speech production model we have. Either we have impulse train as an excitation or noise generator, random noise as an excitation. That's why two state of the excitation is there. We can be used as an excitation source, and the vocal tract system representing the vocal tract cavity, and the lip radiation is as an high pass filter. So you can see a simplified electrical model has been developed from the domain knowledge of speech production. All of us know this inherently is the basic model which we assume for the well-known linear prediction analysis. And we know the benefit of the linear prediction analysis. The codec that goes into our mobile phones is a linear prediction analysis based codec. Even though if you study in detail about the speech production system, it's a good approximation, but it's not the best approximation for the speech production system. But in spite of that, with small such contribution, it has resulted in a very good application area where in the all speech codecs are invariably, most of them, what we use in mobile communication, they're all based on the LP analysis. So if you quickly see that, we have this inverse filter, you get the residual signal, but this itself, that H of Z, H of Z will be the all-fold filter, which is representing the vocal tract system. With the help of that, I can relatively easily pick up the resonant frequency components by using the LP spectrum, or this is a normalized error representing for unvoiced speech, since it's more noisy, like normalized error is more, whereas voiced speech, normalized error goes down. So that means to say it can do the better prediction for the voiced speech. It's also expected because it's less noisy, more correlated. That is, so with that itself, a simple two-stage speech production model, we are able to segregate the vocal tract system and excitation source component, code them separately, and then synthesize the speech, what is happening in your mobile phones. You can see if somebody gets some knowledge from the production, it can indeed be exploited to come up with methodologies for speech analysis. And then again, it was slightly modified. Well, I'm doing linear prediction analysis. can I also exploit some of the perceptual knowledge? That is where this perceptual linear prediction analysis is done. When I get this speech signal, before doing the LP analysis, some of the peripheral auditory perception results are exploited to manipulate the speech signal before going for deriving the linear prediction coefficient. For example, the concept of critical band analysis is there in the peripheral auditory system. Equal loudness pre-emphasis concept is there. Intensity loudness conversion is there. So these three, which the people who are studying speech perception, especially the functioning of the peripheral auditory system, they proposed these concepts by analyzing the perception, mammalian perception, peripheral auditory system. And Professor Heine Karmansky exploited this concept, and he passed the speech signal. In conventional LP analysis, directly we pass it to this last module for deriving the LP coefficient. In place of that, he passed the speech signal through some of these perceptually motivated steps, and which shown to giving a better performance in under certain conditions for PLP analysis compared to the conventional linear prediction analysis. Of course, he also demonstrated how we can use perceptual linear prediction for Kepstell coefficient extraction. For example, here, if I go for conventional Kepstell analysis, I do Hamming window, magnitude spectrum, I take MEL filter bank, and then get the MEL filter coefficients. So then there, instead of doing that MEL filter coefficient, he goes through a separate process, Bark filter, equal loudness, intensity, linear prediction, and recursive Kepstell computation he does parallelly. So you can see by using some simple results from the speech perception, auditory perception, they were able to get good feature representation for the speech signal. Okay. Similarly, coming to the speech perception, even though I explained those concepts that are all belonging to this cochlea phenomenon, inner ear. So this is where the whole spectrotemporal representation comes into picture. If I expand that inner ear, it goes in this way. The acoustic signal goes as acoustic variations in the outer ear. At the tympanic membrane or eardrum, that membrane vibration converts this acoustic pressure variation to equivalent mechanical variations. Those mechanical variations are transmitted through these three bones which are there in the middle here, which impinges on a soft membrane that is available as an entry point for the cochlea. And this cochlea has this basilar membrane, which will essentially do a spectrotemporal analysis of the signal. That is where you get that spectrotemporal. From here, it goes to the auditory nerve, to the through the auditory pathways to the auditory cortex. So up to this point, it is well understood what is happening inside this cochlea or inner ear. And that basis, they have developed that MEL filter bank or other perceptual phenomenon like equal loudness, Bark scale, and all those things. With the help of that, indeed get good feature representation methods in the speech process. For example, this is the MEL filter bank, which shows that more sensitive to lower frequencies, and the width of the filter, bandwidth of the filter increases logarithmically as you go up to the high frequency. So this concept we are using is MEL frequency coefficient extraction compared to the linear Kepstell coefficient that we directly extract by short-term Fourier transform and Kepstell analysis. On the other hand, initially the speech frame is passed through this MEL filter bank, looks like MEL filter bank energy, then apply Kepstell analysis, shown to give much better performance compared to direct Kepstell analysis. So the important step, what I'm trying to emphasize at this point is, of course, I'm not saying that this MEL filter bank concept is easy, but this was a result available in the speech perception. People studied this periphery auditory processing system, working of periphery auditory processing system, and they put forward the behavior of the human ear, that cochlea, with reference to the acoustic stimuli. Based on that, they told it behaves in a non-uniform way. The result was taken and made this non-uniform MEL filter bank. And we have seen the benefit that we have got as a speech signal processing community by exploiting this non-uniform MEL filter bank. So along the same lines, what I'm thinking is there are several cognitive speech processing literature or concepts that have been proposed, which can indeed be exploited for better speech analysis and processing, especially reinterpret or understand what is happening by representation level. Of course, in the Kapsel analysis, we go by, as I told, windowing, discrete Fourier transform, logarithm of that. Then you take the inverse discrete Fourier transform of the log magnitude spectrum that gives us the Kapsel. In place of that, what we do is we will apply this MEL filter banks before taking the inverse discrete Fourier transform. So that gives us rearrangement of the energies to low frequencies, better resolution for low frequencies. That has changed the way information. The fact that continuously the direct extracted Kapsel coefficient versus MEL frequency Kapsel coefficient seem to be giving very good performance. It shows that significance of this exploiting the MEL scale filter bank for Kapsel analysis. Okay, this is that delta coefficient temporal changing phenomenon. So all these things somehow exploit the peripheral auditory system. Even though we don't study how the human brain works by recording the brain activity by EEG or some other thing, but there are psychoacoustic studies that have been made, which is essentially a scientific study for sound perception, where both ear and brain are involved, but it is only by a non-invasive way and indirect way of recording the response. Only human subjects' responses are recorded. Based on that, you put forward some models. Okay, so essentially, we all agree that human ear is very good at processing the speech signal, and our inner ear, that is cochlea, will do a very good job for signal processing to convert speech waveforms into neural stimuli. Then, even if there are certain differences between waveforms, they may not be perceptible. That is how it is our cognitive system is insensitive to speakers or change in some other small components. And also it has a nonlinear response to sounds of different intensity levels. Okay, so all these things have been found out by these psychoacoustic studies. One of the important result we have seen is masking phenomenon, which has been exploited for MPEG audio codec. When you see, suppose for a particular frequency component, this is called as a masker, and the small sound is called as a masked sound, and this is a masking threshold for this masker. So what they have found again by the psychoacoustic, that if the energy of the masker level is a masker, then you will not be able to perceive this sound. So as a result of this, when suppose if both these components are there, to save the bit rate or data rate for compression, you don't need to code this component. Anyway, you will not be hearing that. You can see the whole this equal loudness curve and all those things are sound pressure level as a function of frequency. This curve, general auditory curve, threshold in quiet, what we got, this curve and this curve, they're all constructed from the psychoacoustic results. They may not be interested in the application area, but as engineers, people have ported that masking phenomenon into audio codec. So that resulted in very effective audio codec. So this is another example which gives us saying that we can indeed we have exploited some results from production, some results from peripheral auditory processing, that is speech perception. Similarly, some psychoacoustics for analysis and processing of speech and audio signals. I am hoping along the same direction, we may be able to exploit some of the findings from the cognitive speech processing area for speech analysis and representation. So that is the way I am thinking, because nowadays, when we are giving directly spectrogram as input raw data to the deep learning representation, we are just limited by the MEL filter bank, MEL based spectrogram, gramatone based spectrogram. All these things are just exploiting the findings from the peripheral auditory system. Alternatively, if I am able to construct a spectrographic representation by exploiting some phenomenon from the auditory cortex, that may give a very good representation for extracting the information further by the deep learning model. That is what I wanted to say. LP model, MEL filter bank, perceptual linear prediction analysis, psychoacoustic masking phenomena. These are all taken as some example cases where the knowledge available in their respective domains were exploited to come up with very good speech processing methods, speech analysis and processing methods. In the same way, now what we are thinking is the next best representation as raw data for the speech signal is this spectrogram. If that is the case, can I get very good spectrographic like representations, spectrotemporal representations based on some of the findings from the cognitive speech processing? That may give us a very good input representation for learning by the deep learning systems. So that is the hope. This is again auditory pathways I have shown. This also I mentioned just for re-emphasizing that. Exploited the speech production knowledge, we got this LP analysis. Exploited the speech perception, resulted in many things. One of the well-known thing is the MEL filter bank. Of course, that exploited the psychoacoustic result, which resulted in many phenomena. Masking phenomenon is one thing. So this, as I mentioned earlier also, this first stage of acoustic treatment, that is peripheral auditory system, that is up to cochlea, before reaching the auditory cortex through the neural pathways, it is well characterized. Not much on what happens in the auditory cortex. So, for example, it is in the way to understand the auditory cortex phenomenon, it is difficult as different units, phoneme, syllable, prosodic information having different time scales. Okay. That is where the stages involved in the auditory cortex and other cortices associated with that are the intense cognitive speech processing research areas. Now, suppose if I want to move from what we are doing from the peripheral auditory system to the cognitive speech processing area, if you just see what happens, human way of speech processing versus computing way of speech processing. As humans, we are all witness to this thing that speech signal available in the external world as acoustic pressure variations gets converted into mechanical variations in the middle ear, and that gets converted into electrical variations in the inner ear. Okay, so that electrical variations are nothing but the bioechoed potentials which are traveling on the auditory nerve. Okay, this I also mentioned that human ear is good at processing the speech signal. Basically, this bioechoed potential, which is a two-dimensional signal, amplitude, bioechoed potential value versus time, it gets converted into a spatial representation, three-dimensional representation on the auditory cortex, which is essentially spectrotemporal plus the intensity in certain location of the spectrum. Just like your spectrogram, which is the three-dimensional representation presented in the form of a two-dimension. Same way, the spatial representation, which is time versus frequency plus the intensity, which is 3D information available in the auditory cortex. Okay, so when we do some of the brain recordings while speech communication is happening, especially MRI and other techniques, you see such type of spatial representation getting constructed. Okay, it shows that the representations that are getting generated in the cognitive system, essentially auditory cortex and associated areas, give us a clue that we will also be able to construct such representations as raw data input to the deep learning model systems. Okay, whereas when I go for computing machines, we have exploited signal processing for all these things. As I told, based on production knowledge, we have linear prediction analysis. For perception knowledge, we have MEL filter bank and psychoacoustics. Okay, now we have the next level of signal processing by exploiting the cognitive speech processing knowledge. So that is one direction of looking into exploiting the cognitive speech processing findings, because the cognitive speech processing literature is there for several decades. Of course, that was an isolated study. People are just interested in knowing this miracle, what is happening in the human brain analysis, because of the non-stationary nature of this signal. But now, can we view this as a unified framework by exploiting the temporal organization of the cognitive system, temporal organization of speech by the cognitive system? It may give us much more compact multi-resolution analysis of the speech signal by exploiting this temporal organization. For that, we need to study the cognitive systems temporal organization concept from several literature. Based on that, we can come up with a unified framework for the speech representation. So accordingly, in the rich representation that you are giving for the deep learning models, if you are able to enhance the information available at all these three levels, may indeed improve the performance of these. Because even though the spectrogram that we are trying to construct and present it to the deep learning model is just a magnitude spectrum, or based on short-term Fourier transform or its variants, but it will be losing a lot of information which may be available at the segmental level or suprasegmental level. We can make special attempt to reinforce them also by exploiting the cognitive concept. Similarly, we have done all these things: time domain analysis, amplitude variation as a function of time, frequency domain analysis, amplitude versus frequency, time frequency analysis, amplitude versus time and frequency. One example is the spectrogram, which is amplitude versus time and frequency. Then we have essentially focused on extracting the vocal tract information as feature vectors for speech recognition. We have also exploited the excitation source information to find out whether the given segment of speech signal is voiced, unvoiced, pitch, GCI, classical closure instant, residual based mel frequency capsular coefficient, and other source features. We have also exploited the phase information in terms of group delay, Hilbert phase, instantaneous phase. We have also, in a crude manner, we have also exploited these modulation features, modulation functions. So all these things, if you see, they are directly or indirectly based on what is available as a signal processing method that I can do, plus some knowledge from production and peripheral auditory, that is speech perception and so. What I am putting forward is, can we do some of these approaches, if not all, by exploiting the cognitive speech processing? Can we reinterpret some of these methods and develop new approaches for all these things with the help of cognitive speech processing concepts? So that is the point which I wanted to say. For example, if you see, we had a time domain signal and the corresponding short-term Fourier transform is there. We know that the short-term Fourier transform computation itself has its own limitation because of the Fourier representation, but still this gives a much better view of information compared to what is available in the waveform. That is how this axis, this x-axis is time, then maybe it is y-axis is or y-axis is the amplitude and z-axis is the frequency. Now I can see how spectro-temporal variation of the information is happening. We appreciate, this is a much more revealing representation compared to just the time domain waveform if you want to know more about the spectral information. Okay, so that way, the short-term Fourier transform, a simple tool which was available as a modified version of Fourier representation, reveals more things. In the same way, if I have some results in cognitive speech processing, can I come up with some representations like this, which helps me to understand the information manifested in the speech signal is much better. So that is similarly, we have the spectrogram also. Again, that's just from 3 dimension, we have come into 2 dimension. What I'm expecting is, all these things have its own artifacts because of the limitation of time frequency analysis that we are trying to do using the Fourier representation. Alternatively, can I construct such a representation for deep learning purpose to do that representation learning by exploiting some of the cognitive speech processing phenomena? Even the simple filter bank concept, which was a very exciting research area as an advanced topic in signal processing, as multi-rate signal processing, all those things. The basic genesis of that was what is happening inside the cochlea. That now the speech signal gets segregated into several small bands, and each band is processed by a subgroup of neurons and taken into the auditory nerve. And that gave us a very exciting field of filter banks in the signal processing area. Like you can do AM filter bank, where you can just get the amplitude envelopes, or you can derive both amplitude modulated components as well as frequency modulated components. So all these things gave us, again, this is another interpretation to say that of course, these are not exact replica of what is the hypothesis or the finding that they have put forward in the study of speech or auditory speech perception, but they have said that this phenomenon exists. So we have done in our own way in signal processing to mimic such activity, and that itself has given benefit. So that is the point which I am trying to say when I go for cognitive speech processing. We can do the speech analysis based on cognitive speech processing. One is temporal organization. Can we have a visual representation derived from speech that can show this cognitive aspect of temporal organization? Then, can I have sparse representation? The sparse representation framework to mimic this cognitive speech processing phenomenon, where very large dimension vectors can be selected and constructed, inspired from the cognitive speech. Anyway, that is happening. Then how do I? Similarly, spectrotemporal representations. Instead of going by conventional short-term Fourier transform representation for the spectrogram reconstruction, can we have equivalent spectrotemporal representations which minimizes the artifacts of the conventional short-term Fourier representation, also enhances the required information? Of course, this also, I briefly mentioned that in cognitive thing, there are several layers of neurons. The information flow happens back and forth between the several layers of neurons before the information is actually comprehended. That layered way of processing also can be exploited. So these are some of the 4 phenomena. There may be many more phenomena in cognitive speech processing which can be exploited for furthering, our signal processing direction, as well as taking the benefit from the deep learning for doing the needful. I think I'll just summarize. So I gave a brief introduction to the speech processing area. Then the human approach for speech processing was highlighted at some points. Then the handcrafted features like LP coefficients and MFCC, also representation learning from speech processing, need for such things, the advantage of that. Then speech production and the models, I explained, speech perception and models. Then the way forward for exploiting cognitive speech processing, some of the directions were. I think with that, I'll stop here. Thank you very much. I think if there are any questions, I'll be happy to take up. Okay, so any questions? So, Jagabandhu, have you mentioned that they may be, if they are interested, they may consider taking exam and get the grades?
No,
Yeah, maybe you can mention to the. Just wanted to tell if it is optional. If some of you are interested in getting a graded certificate, otherwise we just give a participation certificate. But if you need a graded certificate, we will consider, we will have a small examination at the end of the course, and depending on the score you get, we will give the grade certificate from the institute. So one of the concept is, how much good questions you ask in the presentation, that will also have some weightage for that grade. So that's where I wanted to. Please ask questions, otherwise, it looks like we are talking to a wall, video wall. Okay. Any of you have any questions? Okay, so if there are no more questions, sorry for this one. Let us go for Professor Rufinar's talk. Professor Rufinar.
Hello.
Hi.
Good morning.
Hi.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon for us. Good morning for you, Professor Rufinar.
How are you?
Fine, fine,
Well,
fine. How are you?
very well, very well. Thank you. Thank
By any chance, Messi is in your town?
you. Sorry?
Messi is in your town?
Yes, yes.
So we can, at least our participant can meet him.
Yes. Thank you for your presentation. I think that is a very good overview. And perhaps we can think about the cognitive speech processing in two different directions.
Hmm.
One direction is from a speech signal to brain signals. That is what is called cognitive speech coding. And the other way is from brain signal to speech, and that is cognitive speech decoding. So I think that in a way, perhaps we can share a common vision between all this broad field.
Definitely.
Yes.
Yes. Thank
Okay.
you, Rafina. Yeah.
Well, I will share my screen now.
Yes.
Minutes.
Maybe Jagabandhu, you need to stop recording and then start.
Yes.
Okay.
Now you can. Then now you can start. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, okay. In this part of the course, we began to see some different aspects and characteristics of brain-computer interfaces. So in this part of the course, we will focus on brain signals specifically and try to get the important information in order to control some device. So I began with a brief introduction. This is BCI is one type of human-computer interfaces, which is a motivation for BCI, brain-computer interfaces. The first one is to try to get a more direct communication between man and machine, because there is nothing more inner than thoughts. You have it there. So the idea is to get faster, perhaps more reliable communication way with the computers or with other persons also, so some device, more secure, more robust. This is not always the truth, because as we already talked, it's a difficult problem. Also can be silent communication in different ways because you only use brain signals. And one possibility is to use a multimodal alternative, combining not only brain signals, but another signal associated with communication. It is also used especially in the context of patients with some type of disabilities. For example, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis produce some type of blocked in the communication with the external world for the patient. Multiple sclerosis, brainstem stroke, and trauma also give the similar symptoms, what it called the locking syndrome, that the person is perfectly well, he's thinking okay, but he can't communicate with the rest of the external world. So this is a very hard problem for the patient. and brain-computer interfaces provides a way for communication for these patients. So we remember now the definition. A brain-computer interface provides its user with control channels that are independent of the brain's normal output channels, that are muscles and peripheral nervous system. So which are the steps that you need for do a working BCI? The first issue is to record the brain activity. Then you try to identify the principal or main signal patterns. You have to decode them into meaningful commands from some device. Then you have to send the commands to the intended device, like a wheelchair or something like that, and provide feedback to the user. This is especially on the online version and most realistic version of BCI. And also, because you are working with person, you have to take into account some requirements about safety, reliability, and real-time processing. So this put this problem in the context of a very, very challenging engineering and really multidisciplinary problem. So we also remember here the generic brain-computer interface block diagram we saw yesterday. And now we proceed to go in each of the stages and trying to see a broad image of different techniques that were applied in BCA for each stage. So we began recording the brain signals with the signal acquisition stage. Then we proceed to signal processing and classification. The translation stage try to convert the classification of the previous stage to a particular command, and then the output of translation stage go to the application and give some feedback to the user. So now we try to put the focus in each one of these stages and look for the different techniques that were applied. And we also especially take into account the main characteristics of the EEG signal. So let's talk about the signal acquisition stage. In this stage, we acquire several brain signals. Yesterday also we presented a very, very broad idea of this. Now we will talk a little more about these different methods of take information about the brain. The invasive technologies like electrocorticography or intracranial electroencephalography are the ones that have optimum quality, because the electrodes are really on the surface or inclusive or even inside the surface of the brain, because the electrodes are implanted directly on the brain cortex. But in the other side, they have a risk of infection and also scarring. So this type of invasive technology only is used when the patient has some previous problem, for example, some epilepsy or some other affection that need the implantation of these electrodes in order to get some therapy. So some researchers can use the installed facility there and take all these signals. But it's not for all people, for all dietary activities. So another non-invasive technologies that are really more useful for the rest of the people are magnetoencephalography. Magnetoencephalography, there is, we will go to the details next, but here in the picture you can see one of these equipment. Really you use a magnetic device field to capture the change in magnetic fields at level of the cortex. They are big and not portable equipments. You also have a functional magnetic resonance, also very big and expensive equipments. You also have a functional near-infrared spectroscopy. These are portable equipment and low cost in general. And then you have electroencephalography that we go here in little in what follows, because it is one of the most studied signal from brain activities. So here we have a brief summary of the different characteristics of each type of signal acquisition system. So here we have EEG, EMG, FNIRS, fMRI, ECOG, and single unit recordings. And that's characteristic. We can see here the price, the portability, safety, temporal resolution, and spatial resolution. So as you can see here, EEG is one of the best options in order to get signals from brain. So it is one of the most used technology nowadays. So let's talk about this signal. Well, a brain electrical charge is maintained, as you know, by billions of neurons, really. They pass the signals via action potential trains created by the exchange between ions in and out the cell. Each cell produces these action potential trains in the soma or the body of the neuron, and this is transmitted to the axon and the dendrites, and through the dendrites the neuron connect with other neurons. So when the ions reach the electrodes on the scalp in the EEG, they can push or pull electrons on the metal of the electrodes, and the difference in voltage between any two electrodes can be measured by a simple voltmeter. So when you're recording all this voltage over time and at different locations, then the EEG was produced. So this is the general idea. So you have, as you can see in this picture, the neurons inside the brain, at the cortex. The cortex has really several layers of neurons, body neurons, something like 5 or 6 layers in depth. And the generation of really very, very small electrical fields by this synaptic current that we already talked about propagate through this skull and different layers of tissues and go through the EEG electrode. And the EEG electrode measures the signals through these layers of tissue, needing the simultaneous activity of really thousands of cells to the signal becoming large enough to be seen here at the surface of the scalp. So when you put here an electrode, really you are measuring the activity of thousands in each electrode of thousands of cells. So because really the electrical fields are very, very small. And the recording of the EEG signals are really, in general, multi-channel. you have electrodes overall the scalp. And if you see here, this is the cap, one of the caps you put on the head, and here are the different electrodes and the cables through the amplifiers. So the intensity of this, each waveform is quite small, in the order of microvolts. The frequency bandwidth is from 1 hertz to about 50 hertz, very low frequency also. If we compare this frequency with the speech, the frequency or bandwidth of a speech signal, that is about 10 kilohertz, something like that. Well, we see very different range of frequency involved. So this issue is important in order to know how to extract important information from this type of signals. Well, the scalp EEG activity shows oscillation at different frequencies. Wave shapes are commonly type of sinusoidal waveform. So if you measure peak to peak, normally range between 0.5 and 100 microvolts. They have characteristic frequency ranges and spatial distributions that are associated with different states of the brain. And they generally categorize in basically 4 groups. Beta waves from 12 to 30 hertz, they are looking like this. Alpha waves from 8 to 12 hertz, like this. For example, alpha waves appear when the people is in rest, quiet. So this type of very regular waves appear in the EEG. Theta waves from 4 to 8 hertz, and delta waves from 1 to 4 hertz. As you see here, they are ordered from low frequency to high frequency. And even in some classification, you also get another category that is gamma waves and also high gamma waves that are very important, are with frequencies above 30 hertz, above 35 until 100 in some cases, depending on the frequency band of the equipment. They can register some important information related, for example, with speech energy envelope or some characteristics of intonation or something like that, that they are captured there in gamma band or in gamma waves. So in order to register or record the signals, you have to take or have with you an EEG amplifier with several channels, generally between 8 and 200 or even more channels is the usual setup. This type of amplifiers are special instrumentation amplifiers because of the small values of the amplitude of the signal in microvolts. You also have some all the electrodes and jelly also in some cases if you don't use dry electrodes. Then you have to use a rubber cap and all the cables if you don't use some type of wireless cap. You also need a skin pencil and measuring tape in order to put or control the different points of the head in order to put the electrodes in a specific anatomical position, as we will see. We need also a computer recording device, acquisition and analysis softwares and toolbox, and also a quiet and comfortable room in order to get all the recordings. Mhm. These are the basic setup needs for recording the EEG. The electrodes are a special point important to mention. We have different types of electrodes, the disposable ones, different hairless or pre-shell types, also reusable disc electrodes, gold, silver, etc. You also have headbands and electrode caps that you can use them in order to easily set up all the electrodes in over the scalp. Then you also have saline-based electrodes and needle electrodes sometimes that go inside the first layer of tissue of the head. So all of this has different advantages or disadvantages, because it is very important how the signal arrives to the electrode, and especially in the contact of the electrode and the surface of the head. Electrode locations and names are specified by the International 1020 system. In the 1020 system, the labels designate the proportional distance between ears and nose, where the points for electrodes are chosen. So they are particular parts of the scalp where you have to put the different electrodes, and also the placement of each electrode are labeled according to the brain areas. F for frontal, central, temporal, posterior, and occipital, different letters for each one. So when you see the registers, you can easily know from which part of the head each channel is. And the letters are accompanied also by odd numbers at the left side of the head, and even numbers on the right side. Here you have a picture where you can see the different labels of each electrode. This is here the nose. This is one ear and the other ear. This is the back part of the head. And between the ear and the nose, this 1020 designated proportional distance really in an angle here. From the points where every line of electrodes remain there. So this is a classical form to put and denominate it the electrodes and the channels. As you get more channels, this will be more dense, but the idea and the distribution is similar. Well, the presentation of the EEG channels in general is referred to as a montage. A montage is the particular form every electrode measures the voltage in different points of the scalp. So you have the most used montage, that is the bipolar montage, where each channel represents the difference between two adjacent electrodes. So you have one electrode and the adjacent one, and then you calculate or measure the difference between the voltage in each electrode. Then you have the referential montage. Here, each channel represents the difference between a certain electrode and a designated reference electrode. Can be one in one of the ears, for example, or another part. The average reference montage with this CAIR. In this montage, the outputs of all the amplifiers are summed and averaged And this average signal is used as a common reference for each channel. So this is also very, very used because some equipments direct use one of these type of montage. And the other one is the Laplacian montage, where each channel represents the difference between an electrode and a weighted average of the surrounding electrodes. So in this form, with one of each montage, you have different effects, especially on the spatial distribution and on the spatial frequencies of this multidimensional signal. Well, as in another acquisition systems, one of the problems is noise. Generally, in the input to the amplifier, you have basically 5 components. One is the desired biopotential from neurons, and from specifically from neurons that are involved in the task you're trying to measure. Not all the neurons. That are the desired biopotentials, but you also have undesired biopotentials, endogenous noises. For example, biopotential by neurons other than the ones involved in the task you're trying to measure. These are specifically are noises. And also you can have interference signals generated by the interface between tissue and electrode. That's the importance of the process to carefully put the electrode in each place of the scalp. And also, of course, power line noise of 50 or 60 hertz and all its harmonics is also generally a problem. And other noises and artifacts, for example, ECG or EOG, electrooculography, also introduce some changes or artifacts in the signal. If we try to classify different artifacts, they can be patient-related or technical artifacts. From patient-related side, you can see that any minor body movements introduce a change in the EEG. Also the EMG, any electromyography activity introduce artifacts in the signal. Also ECG, and if the person have a pacemaker, and that's also a problem for signal acquisition. Eye movements and blinks, when the person blinks or move the eyes in some direction, these also produce artifacts or can produce artifacts in the signal, and also sweating. From the technical side, 50, 60 hertz noise, impedance fluctuation, especially where you put the electrodes, cable movements, broken wire contacts, too much electrode paste or jelly. If you put too much or too low, there's problem in both locations. And also low battery is the equipment is based on batteries. When you have to buy or use an EEG amplifier, there are several characteristics that you have to take into account. Between these characteristics, one of the most important is the number of channels. As more channels you have, better, it is better, but also the cost of the equipment or amplifier will be very expensive if you have a lot of channels there, like for example 500 channels you can do it, or even 1,000 electrodes is also for some equipment is available. Another important characteristic is the sampling rate. the bandwidth of the EEG is between 50 and 100 hertz, as we already see. So the best, also the best you have, but in general are all low frequency equipments, no more than 200, 300 hertz. For some type of special studies, you can use also or increase the bandwidth, but in general, in the order of 100 hertz. The bits per sample are also important. You have to work with 32 or 64 hertz. Bits per sample. The signal to noise ratio is also very, very important. The use of instrumentation amplifiers have the advantage to a very or relatively high signal to noise ratio. The type of electrodes also, if the equipment is wired or wireless, really because the signals are very, very small, in the order of microvolts, it is better for acquisition purposes that you use wired amplifiers. But all is really more comfortable wireless versions. And then you have to take into account the accessories, the compatibility, and also the cost of each equipment. So here you have also two alternatives: closed and commercial equipments, or in the other way, open source solutions. Here I put you the link to one open access or open code also alternative from the university here in Entre Rios. You can go to this site and you can download all the necessary stuff in order to get your amplifier function, even all the case with 3D printers. You can print all and assembly all. But when you go to commercial solutions, we have here in the top of the figure these alternatives that are around $100,000. This is the most expensive alternatives. In general, the better alternatives, but very, very expensive. In the middle, you have these alternatives around $10,000, like Gitech or Omni-Euro. We have one of these to use in our lab, and the database we will use in the tutorials. One of them is recorded with this equipment. And also we have low-cost alternatives like Emotive or OpenBCI that they are around $1,000. In this case, the signal to noise ratio is generally worse than the other alternatives. But for some applications, I think it is sufficient for registering and doing some activities related to or initiated brain-computer interfaces. OpenBCI has also the alternative to download also all the circuits and diagrams, and also the cap. You can print the cap and all the equipment, or you can buy from them directly also. Well, we will talk a little about the software that you need in order to acquire and analyze the EEG. Of course, the software and drivers provided by the equipment manufacturer. This is very important. Commercial software that you can buy with the equipment or apart from the equipment. You also need some type of software like some specialized MATLAB toolboxes. One example is EEG Lab, that is very used in the community. Another example is Python, a specific Python package like MNE, that we will review it in the tutorial. Some of the main issues related to MNE. Then you also have these BCI implementation platforms like BCI 2000 or OpenVibe. In this implementation platform, you have different blocks with the different algorithms you can use for brain-computer interface. So you can make some type of visual programming and put all together the equipment and the different processing, classification, and translation stages to implement the basic paradigms available for BCI. So it's really relatively easy to work with this type of implementation platforms, especially for brain-computer interface. Well, in this context, we will review now the brain-computer interface main paradigms. We remember here that the paradigm is really the control signal, the signal that you use to control the device of the application associated with the BCI. They are associated with mental phenomena and the strategy used to modulate the brain activity, the control signal. So you have to mention here slow cortical potentials, steady state visual evoked potentials, event-related potentials, what is called P300. We will review this type of paradigm in what follows because it's one of the most common, most studied paradigms. Then you have motor imagery, and of course, speech-related paradigms that we will look all these different characteristics from each paradigm in the following lectures. So let's talk a little about event-related potentials. The idea here is that you can find positive peaks in the EEG due to infrequent auditory or visual or even somatosensory stimuli. For example, you can hear a tick, a special sound that stimulates your ear, and this is really, in that case, involuntary because this impulse sound, for example, elicited a particular response in your brain. So these endogenic responses are generally elicited about 300 milliseconds after attending to the stimulus, what is called an oddball stimulus, rare stimulus there. The performance may be reduced because the user gets used to this infrequent stimulus. As the user becomes in the experiment or trying to use the BCI, he gets used to the stimulus and it's not such as infrequent for him or for her. So this can reduce the performance of the paradigm, but the one advantage is that this paradigm not require previous training because it is involuntary, this type of evoked potential. So this stimulus, here you can see the rest EG, the EG in rest, or when there's no touch the stimulus present. And then when the odd stimulus appear, the EG change in this way with this type of wave here, and particularly this positive peak at approximately 300 milliseconds after the stimulus. So the difference between these both states can be used by the interface, brain-computer interface. If you can detect this peak here, then you can send some type of command to the device. That's the idea. In this picture is a little simplified the problem, because in general it is not as prominent as in this case. This really is the result of the average over many stimulus. But you can think that the general idea remains. So in which way you can use this to communicate to the BCI? Well, in general, you have a matrix of symbols or commands where the rows or columns are flashed at random while you monitor the EEG, and the user gazes at the desired symbol, pay attention to a particular symbol, for example, a letter, and counts how many times the row or columns containing this desired symbol or character flash. And then when this happens, P300 is elicited only when the desired row or column flashes. So the classical use is this Dunkin speller with all the characters in rows and columns. So time to time, at a particular rate, each one of the rows or the columns are illuminated several times each. And for example, if you pay attention to one letter, to pose P, to pay attention to P. So the different rows are illuminated. When the row you are paying attention to the particular letter is illuminated, then P300 evoke potential appears in the EEG. And the same, of course, when you illuminated the column. So with this information, we will see later how you can know or process or extract information in order to spell each of the letters, for example, of a word. This type of interfaces works very well, but they are very, very slow in order to produce the message, because of all this process of illuminate different rows and columns. Well, we go on now with the signal.
I have a question.
Sorry?
Excuse me, sir. Yes, sir. Last slide, you have shown the BCI paradigm figure. So can we see any live demonstration of this, or somewhere we can visualize this thing which you have explained?
Yes,
This whole matrix, how the user gazes at the desired symbol and how he see the P300, how it flashes, anywhere we can see live video or any demonstration.
Yes, in the next lectures, we will see more details on this. Today is only a broad introduction and basic BCI characteristic or not more details today. But in the next lecture, we will describe better all the paradigms, not only P300. P300 is the most common use, but at the end of the lecture, I also show you some examples of the type of signals you found and how to convert this problem into a binary classification problem, and how to identify which particular letter you spell. But this is at the end of this lecture. It's okay?
Okay, sir.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you
sir.
very much. Well, now we will talk about the signal processing and classification stage. Previously to all the rest of the processing, we have the pre-processing stage. The idea here is to receive the temporal signals from the sensor, from the electrodes on the brain, and prepare them from the following processing stage through different techniques. Today, in the tutorial, we will put hands on this type of processing. One of the basic processing is temporal filtering. For example, to remove 50 hertz noise. Another preprocessing alternative is spatial filtering, because here you have spatial information of all the electrodes that are around the head. So you can do some basic or more specialist type of spatial filtering, and also outlier and artifact removal techniques like independent component analysis. We will see this in the tutorial. In this stage, also you segment the signal for each channel. The idea is that you have, for example, the protocol you used have several stages or parts of the study. So in general, you have to do a segmentation of the signal in small windows, in a small temporal window for each channel. So really you get something like a metric for each channel at the different time windows. And in this way, you prepare all the data in order to, all the signals in order to proceed to the next step in the processing. Spatial filtering is associated to different type of processing between different electrodes in the skull. Some of these spatial filterings are included directly in the amplifier, and some of them you can proceed to apply after the signal acquisition. So the classical is the ear reference. Here you measure the difference between the ear and each one of the electrodes. Here you have the common average reference. For each electrode, you use as reference the average of all other electrodes, and also Laplacian filtering with a small Laplacian, a small neighborhood, and also a large neighborhood. And here in the bottom row, you have the difference in the topographic maps of the skull for the same type of registers. And you see how the different spatial filtering implementation allows you to see or to enhance different type of activity in the brain or in the skull. So here in this table, you have the a summary of the main pre-processing methods used for BCI. For dimension reduction or source separation, in general, you use PCA or ICA. There are several works use this type of dimension reduction techniques. Like the reference here, you can follow them and try to see how they implement them. ICA is one of the most used, especially for artifact removal. And another pre-processing technique in the case of space is CSP, Common Spatial Patterns, that are a spatial filter designed for two classes problem. It has very good results, especially in motor imagery. They use a lot. And there are some also improved versions of this CSP. You can see here the reference for more details. So the next stage is a feature generation stage. Here you use, as is the common practice in other fields also, some type of linear or nonlinear transformation. So you transform the raw signal, raw temporal signal for each channel in one particular transformation, in one particular analysis. For example, you can use a Fourier transform or wavelet transform or something different, or wavelet packet transforms, in order to get different characteristics for each one of the channels. In one of the tutorials, I think tomorrow, you will apply, for example, wavelet transform in order to get basic characteristics for each channel. One problem here is that for each channel, you apply this type of transformations. So in general, you have many dimensions. For example, you have a transformation that takes the raw signal, temporal signal, and produce a feature vector of about 200 coefficients. Then you have 100 electrodes, and you have 20,000 features in total. So in general, this type of analysis gets you a very huge amount of features in order to process by the classification stage. These are the main, or the summary of the main feature extraction methods used for BCI. Autoregressive model and spectral based on autoregressive models are one of the most used techniques. Also, you can use matched filters that they can detect specific patterns. For example, you can use a filter that detects the P300. That's a possibility. You can design the template in the way that it resembles the P300. This is very basic technique, but it is still used sometimes nowadays. Another possibility is continuous or discrete wavelet transform, as I already told you. Here you have some of the works. This is a work from our group that use wavelet transform in order to get this feature vector for each channel. And also sparse representation. Here is another work for our group. These are the principal methods. You have a very interesting review in this paper. I give you the details at the end of the of this talk. You can find there, and you can look for the paper. In general, you also use a feature selection stage because, as you already see, you have a lot of features there. So the idea is to select only the features that has more power in order to make the classification for the most discriminative information ones. So we have different techniques, what it's called the filter model, that really you have all the features there, and you can, for example, start with all the features, and you can get out some of them one by one, and trying to get which is the performance of the system. Or in another way, you can put the first feature and try and get the performance, train the classifier and all of that. Or then the second, then the third, and in that way. And for each set of features, you get some performance, and then with this you select the best combination. This is the simplest way to do it, but it's not the optimal one. So another way to do it is by wrapper model. In the wrapper model, the classifier is inside the loop to get the set or subset of characteristics. So the idea there is to use or put on or off some in the characteristic vector for every one feature. So in that way, you can train the classifier and get only the best performance set of features from there. This is a little more complicated than the previous one, and the last option is what is called the embedded model, that the feature selection and classification methods cannot be separated and all together, integrated. And well, all these methods were used in brain computer interfaces. Here again, in this table, you have the most used ones. Genetic algorithms is generally used as a wrapper method. You can imagine, for example, the feature vectors and zeros when you don't consider the feature, and ones when you use the feature for the genetic representation of each individual in the genetic algorithm. And in that way, you can optimize a subset of features that are optimal for the task. And then some filter methods like sequential forward selection, or in the sequential backward selection. These are suboptimal methods, as I told you, or some other modified version of the previous one. These are also very used because of its simplicity, but they are suboptimal. Here you have the reference also that you can try to look for. And then after this feature selection stage, you have the classification stage. In this classification stage, the idea is to use some pattern recognition techniques in order to classify each of the feature vectors of the previous stage. Traditional cross-validation techniques are used here, and traditional machine learning algorithms also, like decision trees, velocity regression, support vector machines, or neural networks. Here we also have in this table the main methods used in the literature. For example, you can use Bayesian analysis or linear discriminant analysis. This is one of the most used classification model for BCI. In many works you can find it. Here you have some works of my group. Also, support vector machines are also one of the most used techniques. The K-near networks also, or of course artificial neural networks. Okay. So then we will proceed to the translation stage. The idea in the translation stage is to translate the signals or classes from the previous blocks into device commands orders in order to carry out some type of action on the device, to control the device in some particular way. It depends on the particular application. So here you have the person with the cap, or here all the EEG signals, and here is the BCI. And the idea is you can control something like spelling task, as I already talked, or control a prosthesis, or gaming, or control a robotic device on a wheelchair or something like that, or a virtual environment. So when you have the output of the classifier stage, then you have to transform this class into a particular command. This is the translation stage. And now what follows, I will try to show you a particular example of how to apply all of this in the P300 paradigm. So you can see the P300 paradigm as a binary classification problem, because you have to classify two different type of waves in the EEG. When P300 wave appears, you have the target class, and when we have EEG records without P300 wave, is the non-target class. These are the two classes of this binary classification problem. Data is multidimensional. You have multiple channels and several samples time per time window. For example, you can use 10 channels and 150 samples. So the total amount of samples for each window is 1,500 samples in total. This is the dimension of the raw data. In general, this problem is highly imbalanced because you have more non-target than target examples. For example, in the Dong-Tonkin speller, more or less 6 times more non-target than target examples. Very high imbalanced problem. You know that this is really a problem from the classifier, so you have to take into account this problem. The evoked response potential signal is also immersed in physiological and non-physiological noise, as we already saw. So the signal to noise ratio is very low, minus 50 dBs, something like that. Very low signal to noise ratio in general. And the morphology of the ERP also varies between subjects and even within subject, within the same subject. So the translation algorithm needs to be robust to noise and accurate enough in order to establish the communication, because you have to think that for every one of these time windows, you have to make the classification. If the classification is bad, there are some errors there in the communication. If you have the feedback, the online version of the BCI, then the person can correct the error. But that is very time consuming because you have to delete, for example, the character and go on. So you need that the classifier stage make a good job, better than 70% in classification accuracy. So for the feature generation or selection techniques for P300, you have several techniques that were used. For example, this work of Farwell and Donchin, it is a very classical one, is only use picking and area computation. So you detect the peak and then take the area, the peak. Very, very simple characteristics from the raw signal. Then also time frequency representations, match filtering. Again, you can use a template with the approximate shape of the P300 wave. Another method that is piecewise proning method from Janssen. Genetic algorithms also, particularly for the feature selection stage, or even use the raw signal and input this raw signal to the classification stage, weighted packet or other type of weighted analysis. And from the side of classification techniques for particular this type of paradigm, linear discriminant analysis, as I already told you, is one of the most used techniques for classification. A stepwise linear discriminant analysis, that is a variant of the previous one. Also, a Bayesian discriminant analysis, support vector machines, multi-layer perceptron, of course. These are the main classification techniques that were used. Linear nearest neighbors also, linear neighbors, random forest, ensembles. As you can see, practically every classification on pattern recognition technique are used for this problem. Well, let's see now how you can do the translation from this classification, binary classification problem, to the translation in which charity or which letter we think, you think, or the person think or sort in. So the idea here is you have the Dawkins speller, the matrix of characters. So each row and column has an associated code, here a number. First column 1, second column 2, 3 columns 3, and so on. And the same from the rows, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So each code is assigned from each column or each row. And then here you have the recordings of the EEG or the channels. In this case, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 channels. And for every particular moment of the recording, you also have to label each of the time windows with the code you use for each of one of the columns or the rows that you illuminate in that particular moment. So here, for example, you put here, you label this window with 5 because you illuminate it simultaneously while recording this particular column. With 6 is something similar. Sorry. You illuminated this column and so on, and then etc. So for each one of the time windows, you have to solve the binary classification problem. If you find P300, for example, we are paying attention to X letter. So we can see here that in the signal here, you illuminated the 5, that is a column, 6, that is a column, and 10, that is a row, particular row. So 6 is here, sorry, 5 is here, 6 is here, where is the X you are trying to pay attention, the subject is trying to pay attention, and then you illuminated also this column, this row, sorry. So in this way, when you have P300 here and P300 here, you can translate that two actions into the X letter. So in this way, you can go on and try to detect which other letters the person is paying attention. So with this small example, I finish this lecture, and please, if you have some questions now.
Any questions from any of you?
Hello.
Yes, yes.
Am I audible?
Yes, very clear.
Yeah. Sir, I had question on what are genetic algorithm for feature generation. I could not get what does genetic algorithm mean?
So the concept of genetic algorithms that
Okay, in genetic algorithms, it resembles the natural evolution. And the idea there that you have a population of different possible solutions for the problem. In this issue, you have, for example, different sequences of 1 and 0 values there that are correlating with using that characteristic or not using it. For example, you have the 1,500 characteristics there, as in the last example, and you use some ones and zeros there. So when the particular feature is activated, you use it, you have a 1, and otherwise you have 0 there. And you have many individuals in the population. Each individual is one particular sequence of 1 and 0s there. So the algorithms, what it's doing is really try to compete all together that solution, that individuals, and they combine the information of the individuals, and you use what it called a particular function, an objective function there. When for example, you can associate for each particular subset the corresponding performance of the classifier. So you have a score there, and you can select with most probability the better performance individual, and with less probability the lower performance one. So in that way, for some generations, you put this to run, and you can select the best option, the optimal one, or the most optimal that you can take by this type of methods that are not optimal methods, are in general is suboptimal.
Okay.
It is very brief explanation. I don't know if
Okay.
it is clear for you.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Professor, I have one question with special filtering. So how actually we are doing the special filtering? We'll have some kind of reference, or
Sorry, Yaga, can you repeat?
yeah, I'm asking about some about special filtering you have mentioned, no? So how actually they are doing filtering over there? Because with respect to channels they are doing, or what? Not.
Sometimes this type of special filtering is incorporated in the amplifier because of some particular montage of the electrodes. So you get the signals already with this type of spatial filtering. But another times you can do it after the recording of the signals. They are basic methods than the one I told, but also some other ones like common spatial patterns that it is very used, especially in motor imagery paradigm.
Sir, one more question. Am I audible?
Yeah, please go ahead, Nikhil.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sir, in the example which we saw, the row and column example, so we will have P300 occurring both for, say, if we are observing X, it will be there for the row number 6 also and the column number 10 also. So for both of them, it will be appearing, but how do we decide which row and which column? How do we distinguish between rows and between columns?
Because you assign a particular code for each one, each row and each column. So we translate the result of the classification stage into which character, but you need at least that one particular column where and row where the character you are thinking about or you are paying attention is illuminated. So the process can be very slow because many times the rows or columns illuminated are not the ones where your character is in. So this is very slow. For example, you illuminate it 3, 5, 10 times until perhaps you go there in the column or row where your character is. I don't know if this is sufficient for clarifying your question.
No, one, like I am confused. Like if say row number 6 is illuminated and row number column number 10 is illuminated, then also we'll get 2 times the P300, and if some other, say for character P, also some other row and column is illuminated. So are we having the information of row and column also along with the EEG signals to, or we are just finding out from the EEGs only?
I put again
Yes,
the
sir.
pictures so we can
Yes, sir.
talk better.
Yes,
Please,
sir.
can you repeat your question?
Yes, sir. So suppose when 10 and 6 P300 happened, then I can say that X was the character.
Yes.
And suppose 9 and 6 happens, then R is the character.
Yes.
9. But how do I distinguish between 9 and 10? Because I don't, looking at the waveforms only, I will not be able to say whether 9, it was because of 9th row or because of 10th row.
No, because you already label all the EEG signals
Okay.
with the corresponding row or column. This is
Okay.
already done there.
Okay.
So then, when you have a P300, if you find the P300 in one row and the subsequent column, then that's the letter.
Okay.
But if most of the time you have non-target
Yes.
responses.
Okay.
That's the reason for the high imbalance problem.
Okay.
You understand?
Okay. I understood, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Another questions?
Yeah, there are no more questions, Professor Rafina. Maybe we can.
Sir, there is a question in chat box.
Yeah, there is a question in the chat box. We can-
Okay. I will look for it. Okay. Okay. How ECOG signal is different from compared to EEG? Well, the signal to noise ratio is really very high in ECOG because it's a direct brain recording, and this is very important. And also, the spatial resolution is high in ECOG. We will review the details from all these techniques in a later lecture. But the spatial resolution is also very high because you can use a matrix of electrodes that are implanted inside your brain. And with this matrix of electrodes have spatial resolution that is less than a centimeter, 0.5 centimeters, something like that. It depends on the particular array of electrodes you used. But in general, in EEG, you have 1 centimeter or more or less of spatial resolution or separation between electrodes. And also you have all the layer of tissues from brain signal generation until it reach the electron in the scalp. And you have also hair and skin and all of that. So the signal to noise ratio is lower in EEG. That's the main difference between two recordings. With you have the raw signal, you can look for them and they look similar, but really it's better from the point of view of signal acquisition only. It's a better representation, the ECOG or electrocorticograph recordings that EEG. Okay. The rest of the processing is the same, but the problem is more difficult if you use EEG. The other question, do all the electrodes capture similar frequency range? It depends really on the location of the electrode, because in each area you can have different frequency range from the waves you register there. It depends on the electrodes specifically. Also here you have difference between ECOG and EEG, because in ECOG you have a more broad band resistors. So you can register more higher higher frequencies in this type of recording compared with EEG. Okay. And the third question, if we focus only on speech production, in that case, also all the electrodes need to be used. That's a good question. Not necessary. Not necessary. Or we need all the electrodes, for example. But we have to take into account that in the area of the brain that we are interested in put the focus, we need a more spatial resolution there. For example, if you try to get what the person is hearing, then you try to register with a more spatial resolution at the auditory cortex. So there you have to put more electrodes if you can. For example, you can use an amplifier with 6 to 10 electrodes only, but you put the electrodes in that particular location of the scalp. You can do it. But when you don't know which is the useful information, then you have to put electrodes in all the head and then try to look where is the useful information. Okay? Another question? I see that Rashid is there. Nice to meet you.
Rajiv?
Yes.
Oh. I don't. Rajiv is there.
Yes, I see. Well, any more question? Okay, I think that if there are no more questions, we can proceed to the tutorial session.
Hello. Yeah, so we will proceed to the tutorial session. I will present my screen now. So is the screen visible?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so for the part 1 of the tutorial, we will be discussing on the basics of speech processing. So the topics that will be covered will be how to
So,
read and...
I think you have to stop the recording and start again.
Yes. Jagbandu sir, can you do that? Yeah. So welcome everyone for the tutorial of day 2. So in the part 1 of the tutorial, we will be discussing about the basics of speech processing. So the topics that will be covered is uh, how to read and plot the speech files, the non-stationary nature of the speech signal and the frequency domain representation of speech, windowing and spectrograms, what is speech production, the source and filter. Further, we will be discussing about electroglottograph and the glotter closer instance from electroglottograph. So I have already shared you the materials before. So in that material, you can find the MLX file, two speech files that will be used, and one function that will be used. So everyone is requested to load this MLX file onto the MATLAB. So let's see how to import the speech file first. So what we will do is we have to just copy the path by Control C over the wave file that we want to for which we want to paste the path, and we will just paste the path here. Okay, in this way we have imported our speech file to MATLAB. Okay, now let's run it. So by the audio read command in MATLAB, you can read the speech file from the given path that you have specified. And here D is the variable that will have the speech file, and Fs is the sampling frequency. If you see, if we display the sampling frequency here, it is 8 kilohertz. So, and if you see, if you want to see what's the speech, like how the speech looks like, you have to plot it. And for plotting it, just you have to plot it using the plot command in MATLAB. And with respect to time, you can plot, or with respect to samples, you can plot. Here, we have plotted with respect to time, and the speech file looks something like this. Okay. After seeing, you can zoom it also, like to further see the details in the speech file. This is how it looks like in a small segment. Yeah. Now I have further plotted it into, further taken a small segment of 0.5 seconds to get a, if you want to get a better picture of that, then you can further zoom in. Now coming to the non-stationary nature of the speech signal, as you can just, if you just see the speech signal like this, you can see that it is very non-stationary. So basically non-stationary signal is like if you take a small interval of in time, and you check the nature of the speech, and again you take some other interval, in both the interval the speech nature will be different. So I've taken two intervals of 0.04 seconds. You can see that the speech is not same in segment 1 and segment 2. Further, in frequency domain also, it is not the same. Like you can see the third peak here, it is not same as the third peak in the segment 1. So how do we segment the speech file is uh, like in yesterday's tutorial, like MATLAB is similar to Python. Like you can just take the starting point, take the steps in which you want to sample the segments, and up to what you want to sample the segment. That's it. In this way, you can sample the array that you want to plot. That is what is D1 here. That is the segment 1. Similarly, you can take another segment. I've taken it as D2, the variable, and I've plotted it. Just the plotting is similar the way you have done for the speech file in the above cell. Now let's see how to plot it in frequency domain. There's a command in MATLAB known as FFT, that fast Fourier transform. You can directly, it's an inbuilt command, you can directly use that. And here the arguments of the FFT will be the time domain signal that you want to find the FFT for, and the number of points for which you want to find the FFT. Like you can find for like 64 point, 32 point, or 512 point, or these are basically the frequency bins. for which you want to find the FFT. Further, you can plot it in the similar way, like two arguments. This is the independent variable and this is the dependent variable that you want to plot. So here, after plotting, you get this plot here. So as I already said, this is non-stationary. Why? The third peak you can see here, it's, like I will expand it also. Third peak clearly depicts that both signals are not the same, as the frequency magnitude here is lesser than the second one. Now coming to whether this signal is real or not. So if a signal is real, the best way to see it is around the central frequency, whether it is symmetric or not. So this will tell us the signal is real, since you can see it is symmetric. So that is why, since it is symmetric, and why to take unnecessary 8,000 frequencies, we can take the half spectrum, because this is redundant information. If we take half spectrum also, then also we are getting the information of the full spectrum only. So because of that, we are taking the half spectrum for both the segments. So for taking the half spectrum, what you have to, so just to take the values from, it was like all the bins 1 to 1024, you just take half of the bins, 1024 divided by 2, that is 512 bins, and it will plot you the half spectrum. Just like if you here this points are in frequency, when you find FFT, it will give you in frequency bins, that is 0 to 1024. But that if you want to better visualize it, like you want to find it, whether you want to change the scale to frequency, what you have to do is you have to change it like this. The length of the speech, the length of the frequency domain signal divide by 1024 into the number of frequency, into the sampling frequency. So it will change your scale from frequency bins to the sampling frequency, or in the frequency range. So the plotting is similar that I have already discussed. Now coming to the like one more thing, like I would here say, is that you can see that the lower frequencies are very much evident here. Like you can completely see the peaks and the magnitude value here. But when you see the frequency values in the higher frequency ranges, you are not able to identify what actually the peak is, what actually the value is. So what we do is we take a log of this. So what the log does is, you can see the clear difference here. Just we have taken the log of this frequency spectrum, and we can see here that all the higher frequency values that had very low amplitude got enhanced. So it gives a better visualization of the values at the higher frequencies also. So that is why it is suggested to take a log spectrum of the normal magnitude spectrum, magnitude spectrum or frequency spectrum, you can say. Just the thing that you have to do is multiply 10 log of the magnitude spectrum that you have already plotted here above. So that's it. That is what that will give you the log spectrum of the segments here of the frequency spectrum. And plotting is in the similar way. Now coming to windowing. So why do we need windowing? As I said, you should just see the speech signal here, this one. Just looking at this speech, this is a highly non-stationary. But when you see it in a small frequency, small window, okay, zoom it. Okay, when you see it in a small window, you can see there is a periodicity. Like this part of the signal has a similar shape as this part of the signal. So there is a periodicity. So we say that speech is non-stationary or non-periodic signal, but when we look it into a small window, then it is a periodic signal. So that's why we call it as a quasi-periodic signal. It means it is periodic in a small range. So that is what windowing helps us. So windowing, what it does is we divide the speech signal into frames of smaller time segments, and we analyze and we apply the Fourier properties, because as we know that Fourier series and all are valid for periodic signals. So we apply those Fourier properties and all in that periodic range. So basically, as I said, windowing is dividing the speech signal in smaller frames. And here we will be discussing three type of windows, that is rectangular window, Hamming window, and Hanning window. So these are the shape of the rectangular, Hamming, and Hanning window. How can you plot it? Like there's inbuilt commands for in MATLAB. Like rectangular window is just a window of one. Like all the values will be, amplitude will be one throughout. So that is simply ones to the of the length that we want. There's inbuilt function for Hamming and Hanning in MATLAB. You can directly use that for plotting Hamming and Hanning window. So now coming to the frequency domain visualization of these windows, I will expand this. So for plotting the frequency domain visualization, just as we have done for normal any signal, we can use this FFT function, give the argument of the signal that we want to find the FFT for, or the frequency domain for, and the number of pins for which we want to find it. That's it. That is what is required. Then we will get these plots. Now you can see that for a rectangular signal, this one is the first is the main lobe. Okay, the main lobe is very small, and for Hanning window it's quite big, and for Hanning also it's big. But one more thing that we like, you might be wondering, we already have one window. Why do we need other windows when we already had a rectangular window? The main reason is like when we multiply this rectangular window to segment the speech files, then there is a discontinuity, abrupt change at the boundaries. So that is why to smooth that change, we use Hamming and Hanning windows. And also one more reason is the spectral leakage. So spectral leakage is that at the corner frequencies here, since the main lobe is very small, there is too much of frequency, like you can see here. And since the main lobe is very small, there's too much of frequency that is being captured is very less in that window. That is why the other two windows are also very prominent here. So that was for windowing method. Now coming to the spectrograms. So here one thing that you could see, that you have to separately analyze time and frequency. So the time, what if we need to analyze both together, like time and frequency together, like how the signal properties are changing in time, and along with that how the changes is happening in frequency also. So for that there's a method, or there's a pictorial view known as spectrogram, like we can, in which the one of the axis is time and the other axis is frequency, and we plot the signal energy with respect to time and frequency together. So how do we do that is like there's for this also in MATLAB. MATLAB has a very good it's a very good tool for analyzing the signals. Like we already have the windows, and if you want to visualize spectrograms, we have the inbuilt function for that also. Unnecessarily, we don't have to write everything from scratch. So the command for that is you just have to give the arguments, the signal, the window overlap that you want to window and the overlap that you want to give. So window, as I already discussed, we need windows because speech is non-stationary. To make the speech visualize and to make the read the speech in a small frame, it's periodic. So apply the different properties like Fourier transforms and all. We have to divide it into windows. So the window that we have to in which we have to analyze the signal, and the overlap of, like as I already said, there are boundaries, right? So at boundaries there are abrupt changes. So what we do is we overlap some part of the signal so that the boundary abrupt changes doesn't happen. So that is what here that is how much percent of the overlap we have to give, and the frequency bins, the sample frequency. These are the arguments in MATLAB for spectrogram. So it will give you this energy values, frequency values, time and periodicity. These things they will give, and with respect to that you have to plot the spectrogram using this command. So here is the spectrogram that you will see. So here you can see in the time axis and the frequency axis. So with respect to time, we are getting different energy values in the speech signal. How the frequency is changing with respect to every time instance, that you can visualize here in the spectrogram. Okay. Now there are two types of what happens is when you plot this window. So there is one thing like time is inversely proportional to frequency, that everybody knows. Take t equals to 1 by f. So when this window length is high, then in frequency domain, the window that will be generated will be of less width. So the width of the window in time domain is inversely proportional to that of the window in the frequency domain. So that is what happens here. So here narrowband spectrum is like we take a window of wide, if you want, like as the name suggests, narrow band in the band, narrow or wide band is defined with respect to the frequency domain. If it is narrow band, then in frequency domain it will be a narrow band. So if there is a narrow band in frequency domain, which means that in time domain it will be a wide band. So wide, like the width of the window will be wide. Therefore here we are taking a high width window. You can see here that in high width window in time domain, so its analogous will be low width window in frequency domain. So you can see here that there is with respect to this, the normal spectrogram, if you compare, the width of these energy regions have decreased here, which means the resolution has increased. It's like it is analyzing the signal with a higher resolution in frequencies. Now if you want to analyze the signal in higher resolution with respect to time, what you will do is you will take wide band. So in that case you will take smaller window in time domain. So it will segment, it will take the frame size of smaller window in time domain, and if it is taking smaller window in time domain, its reciprocal will happen in frequency domain. It will be a wide band in frequency domain. So that is why we are getting, like if you see, compare narrow band and wide band, here the frequency energy region, the spread has increased with compared to this one. So there is a trade-off. Like if you want to take narrow band in a time domain, you have to take wide band in frequency domain. So better to take a value which is in between narrow band and wide band. So this is a better visualization. We have taken a trade-off, like half of what was taken here. So that's why we are getting good time domain resolution also and frequency domain resolution also. So plotting of these two spectrograms is similar, just we have to adjust the window size here. Like here you can see for normal spectrogram, I have taken 160 samples. 160 samples, like it's 20 millisecond for sampling frequency of 8 kilohertz. You calculate it, it comes out to be 160 samples. And when we are taking narrow band, we have increased the window length in time domain, that is 320 samples. And when we want to see for a wide band, we have decreased it to 40. Yeah, we have decreased it significantly low value. So that's why you are getting a wide band here. Okay. So now that was all for the spectrogram. Now coming to the speech production part. So I think this was already discussed in first lecture of today. Like today's first lecture, what happens is, like air is pumped from our lungs, and this is the glottis. If air is pumped here, this glottis is basically an elastic type thing, which is most of the time it is closed. When you pump the air, it spreads out and it gives a periodic puff of air outside, and this is what we call as the excitation source. It is periodic in nature. Okay. Okay. And this, so till here, this was the excitation source. Now this excitation source comes up to the vocal tract. This entire position of this pharyngeal cavity, nasal cavity, and oral cavity, this makes the vocal tract. That is unique for every speaker. So after this air gets puffed out, so this is what we call as filter also. So this it comes out from pharyngeal cavity. Depending upon the location of the velum, the air will go out from oral cavity or the nasal cavity, and we get the output as the speech. So this will get this is basically a like a block diagram of how the speech is passed. So either we, depending on the vibration in this vocal cord, like if it is like it's wide open, okay, then we don't have voice. It's called unvoiced sound. So in that case, it's kind of a noise generator, and the voice that is called coming out is unvoiced sound. And when there is vibration here at vocal cord, we call it that, like, vibration means the puff of air is coming out. This vocal cord is getting closed at periodic intervals. So this is basically the impulse generator. So in that case, we get the voice sound. So depending upon this thing, whether the vocal cords are wide open or it's vibrating, we get voiced and unvoiced sound. So that till here, that is the excitation source. Now coming from here, we have the filter part. As I said, from here, pharyngeal cavity, nasal cavity, and oral cavity, these are the vocal tract. So this is what we call as the filter. So we have source, then the filter, and whatever we get out is the speech signal. Okay. So how this filter part is mathematically modeled, and if you see it in frequency domain, so it looks like something like this. These are the format, like these are the resonance regions. These are the resonance regions in the in our pipe, like for in this region, for moving from vocal cords to lips. So these are the regions in which there are resonances. So resonances means that the energy regions are high. So that is the part. So how do we get this plot? So we take a small segment, like whatever analysis we do in speech signal, you have to make sure that you have to do it in small frames. You can't take entire speech at a time and you can say that, okay, we have got this thing. So we have to take this small frames, because the speech is highly non-stationary signal taken at a time. So we have to divide it into small frames, and then we have to analyze it. So similarly, we have divided, like on top only, we have divided the speech signal into small frame of 321 samples, and that is called LP analysis. So in that, the LP coefficients basically models the vocal tract characteristics. So there's an inbuilt, as already there's an inbuilt function for calculating the LP coefficients also. So we calculate the LP coefficients, and we get a like if there is a 10, if we specify the order, these are basically the order, LP order. Like you will get, I will share the paper also for that, like for better understanding. Just for the coding part, like if you give the LP order of 10, you will get 10 plus 1 coefficients. So here we are getting, as you can see here, LPC, we are getting a 1 cross 11 array that is of 11 coefficients for this particular frame. And if you see the frequency domain representation of that, so you can use this command fric-z. So that will give that the from the coefficient, that will give you the filter. Basically, this is basically a filter. So it will give you the filter representation of that. So after passing through this fric-z command, you will get H and F. So basically, H is what gives you this LP spectrum shape. So we have plotted it, and this is what the shape is. So here, one more thing from non-stationary point of view is, this is from one of the segment, this is for other segment. So here also you can see that both the LP spectrum are also not similar. The LP spectrum for segment 1 of the same speech is different. This different for the LP spectrum of segment 2 of the same speech. So that is the, but it's not like but it's like, since it is the same from the same speaker and we have already defined the LP order, we are getting similar kind of a shape, but it is very much different because these are two different frames. Yeah, so that is all from this basics of speech processing part. So any questions? this.
Okay, one question from my side.
Yeah.
Actually, in the spectrogram, you have shown that thing. This rectangular window is used, or we can use other windows also?
You can use other windows also, but
Okay.
to make sure like you are giving an overlap, like there is no discontinuity. Like I already said, using just the rectangular signal will give you very much discontinuity, right? There's
Yes.
abrupt change at the boundaries. That is why we use Hamming windows. Hamming windows are also widely used, are generally used, but if you give an overlap of window length by 2, so you are taking care of the boundary condition abrupt changes. So you can use in that case rectangular window also. But better to use
Okay,
Hamming window because it smooths the values at the boundaries.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, then if there are no questions, we will move to the print computing interface part. Okay. So in this, so any question in the MATLAB part? Okay, fine. So in this part 2 of the tutorial, we will see how we how we find the speech envelope from the EEG and okay, so how we find the speech envelope from EEG signal and the vice versa, and how to find the speech signal from, like how to find EEG from speech signal and speech signal from EEG. Basically, like I might I have already shared this Jupyter
Sorry,
note.
sorry, Ayu.
Yes.
I think that this was sought for the third day. You are
Yes,
saying.
yes, sir. It was for tomorrow, but because of some technical reasons, we are doing it today.
Ah, okay, okay.
Yes. Okay. So basically, when we so I have already shared this receptive field IPython file. So everyone, I expect everyone have already loaded this in your Jupyter notebook. So first step will be all the importing all the libraries. So all the libraries that we'll be using here. So the NumPython file, NumPy, Matplotlib for plotting, SciPy for loading the data and all, and also doing some scientific computations for joining the paths, and this OS library is used. So this is one more library that Professor Ruffin has already mentioned, mHenny library. I will give you a brief overview of this library. This is the Python library, mHenny library. This is specially designed for analyzing this EEG data and all. This is MEG and EEG analysis and visualization library. So you can analyze MEG, EEG, SEEG, EcoG, NRIS. These all types of computation, and these things can be done using this library. So now you have to import this mHenny library because this will be widely used. Now inside this mHenny library, there is receptive field class. So this will be used for curve fitting and all. Now after that, for training, for training the data and for dividing the data into training and validation part, we have used k-fold validation scheme. So you have to, from sklearn library, you can import this k-fold and scale. Scale is just for plotting, I think. Now you have to download the data first. So use inside this MNE library only, you have the data. When you run this, you will get the data downloaded in your home folder, MNE data. So there are, so basically there are different mat files. So basically we will be using speech underscore data dot mat for our tutorial. So but so this command load mat, so this command load mat, it will load your data from the path. Inside that, so this data contains lot many signals. So first is EEG signal, the speech envelope, the sampling frequency. So these three are the main data that this speech underscore data dot mat file contains. So EEG signal is collected and it has the data from the 128 channels. Okay, and then the speech envelope data. Now one more thing is like we have this the sampling frequency of this data that if we see it's 128. So since we can downsample further, we have downsampled it to 64 for faster processing. So we have downsampled both speech envelope and the EEG data. And you can see the shape of the data here. So the sampling frequency is 128 and the shape of the EEG signal is like there are 1677 samples from all the 128 channels, and from that we have the speech envelope that is also of 1677 samples. Now, as sir has already mentioned in his session 2 lecture about montage. So montage is basically the representation of EEG signal. So that is what we are doing here. So here you can see this is how the so here all this black one that you is seeing, basically it is a gray color signal, like the gray color part, but 128 EEG signal have overlapped one over the other. So because of that, it is what we are seeing is black color. So all the 128 EEG signal is being plotted here. I will like to plot one of that and you will get a better visualization of that now. So let's plot from the second channel. Let's see. So now you can see the gray color, right? I will expand the sheet if possible. Okay. Yeah. Now it's the gray color. So this is what the EEG looks like from one of the channel. Now if you plot all the channels, just you have to give a semicolon for that. Sorry, the colon for that. We plot all the channels at one time. So after plotting all the channels, it looks like this. And from what we will be doing is, from this speech envelope, we will be predicting like the coefficients of the EEG signal in our first part. So this is called as encoding. From getting the EEG from the speech is called encoding. So that will be done at first part of this tutorial. So as I already said, there is a class known as receptive field. So that is inbuilt in this MNE library. You can directly use that for getting the curve fitting thing. So receptive field is basically the response of the neurons according to the stimuli. So here in the encoding, we will be doing this encoding model part. So it will generate the EEG signal from this speech envelope, and we'll find a linear relationship between the time delayed version of the speech envelope and the EEG signal. So why time delayed version is coming? This is coming because whenever we think, okay, there's some delay until we produce that speech. So to tackle that, we do this time delayed version of the speech. So the delaying is done from minus 0.2 seconds, like from say if current situation is at 0 second, we vary it from minus 0.2 second to 0.4 second. And and we analyze like what is giving the best out of all the delays, which one is giving the best result. So according to that, we find the coefficients. We take that coefficient and we generate the EEG with respect to those. So here receptive field is the class, and this is just we are initializing the model. Okay, and the number of delays that we will be fixing depending upon the Tmin and Tmax. So Tmax minus Tmin into the sampling frequency. That is here. It's 64, and we are also adding 2. Why? Because we want to take the Tmin also and Tmax, like the boundary part also. So that is why we are adding 2 here. So if I have printed the number of delays also, it's coming to be 40. Like we will be analyzing for 40 different time steps, like time delays. Now, it's a well-known method in machine learning or deep learning is that we segment the data into k folds. So what benefit do we get from dividing data into k folds? Say we have lesser amount of data, okay, and we want better learning of our model. So what we do is we say I am dividing here into 3 folds. So out of the 3 folds, 2 folds will be used for training and 1 fold will be used for validation. So say we have first, second, third. First and second will be done for training, third will be done for validation. Now that is for first iteration, you can say, or first epoch, you can say. For the second epoch, first and third will be used for training and the second one will be used for validation. And similarly for the last epoch, first and second will be done, second and third will be used for training and the first one will be done for validation. So in this way, the model learns better. We have different sets of data, and like model is thinking like we have 3 sets of data and it learns according to that. So that is the benefit of k folds here. So yeah, now what we have to do is we have to fit from speech envelope to you have to make a curve fitting basically from speech envelope to the EEG signals. So here these are just initialization. Here everything, these 2 things are initialization variables that will be using that will be using here after model training. So this is basically a curve fitting. You can think this to be a curve fitting regression or curve fitting approach or regression approach. Here rf.fit of the MNE library will take the input and the predicted output, that the output that we want to predict from the, like this is also be a speech and like kind of thing that the output will be predicted. From there we get the score and the coefficients. Coefficients are basically, you can think like the weights of the linear regression model. Okay, so here I will just run the code. I will not run the code above also. Okay, here you can see there are 40, like what I printed, the number of delays, and this is for 76777 is number of samples of the EEG signal, and 128 is the number of channels. Like so, it's a matrix of 7677 cross 128. Now we have already divided the since we are doing 3-fold validation. So for epoch 1, epoch 2, epoch 3, we are doing this curve fitting, and later one thing that you can see here is we are taking the mean of the coefficients for every fold. We have 3 folds, so we have 3 cross. Wait, you see here. Okay, we print it. Yeah, here you can see. So there are 3, since there are 3 folds, there are 3 cross 128 channels and 40 delays. So there, since there are 3 fold, this is 3-fold validation, we have 3 different weight values. Okay, now later we will take the mean of all the folds. So now we will get 128 cross 40. So this is for this is a matrix of 128 cross 40. Okay, after taking the mean of all the folds. So this will give a better fit over the data. So that is what we are doing now. Just initial part was done. Now just it's normal regression thing. Okay. So this is the mean prediction score of that. Now coming to this plot. So which coefficient should we select? So there are n delays, right? I have already said we have why we have introduced delays, because to react to the stimuli from whatever we think and whatever we speak, there is some delay. So for different delays, we are seeing how the EEG signal will come. So for with respect to every delay, we have plotted the model coefficient. Like delay is like all the delays, all the channels, and we will see which one give the most impact. Like you can see after seeing this plot, you can see that at this delay 0.18 delay, we are getting the maximum impact, like the energy value is high. So for that, there is the brain is functioning more for that particular production of speech. So that is plotted here for that time instance. And these are just the commands for plotting this one. The p color mesh, we give the time at which you want to plot this thing, and the number of channels, the mean coefficients that we already calculated here above, mean coefficients that we have already calculated from the curve fitting method. And that was for this plot. And if you want to just see the topo map, so basically a topo map, sir might have already explained in his lecture. A topo map is basically the like top view of how our how our brain is, which part of the brain is fired, which part of the neurons are fired more. So with respect to that, this topo map comes. So at this point, we have at the delay of 0.18, we have plotted the coefficients of the model, and we are seeing that okay, this is the more active part. So here this was encoding. Now coming to the decoding part. So in decoding part, we convert from, like in encoding part, we have seen we have speech envelope to EEG. In decoding part, we have EEG to speech envelope. Okay. So here also we are taking the time delayed version of the EEG signal and the speech signal, so that with respect to different delays, we see which one is the most suitable delay for prediction. So here also that same thing we are doing. We are taking the T mean and T max value, and we are doing this curve fitting using this receptive field class of the MNE library, and we use this k-fold approach of learning the curve, and similar to the last encoding approach, we are using this like fit this receptive field fit command, and we give the input and the output that we want to predict, and according to that we will get the curve fitting coefficients. After we get the coefficients are basically, as I said, those are the weights. And with respect to that, I will run this one also. Okay. An error. So we have divided it into 3 folds. So for every fold, we will get 3 types of coefficients, and we will take the mean of that. Here we have taken the mean, and we have taken the mean, so we have got different coefficients. Now we will see how better like the curve fitting has been done. So this gray one is the true the true value, the true speech envelope, and the red is the reconstructed one. So if you increase the data or increase the complexity, so you will get a better curve fitting here. Yeah. Okay. So Here we just see how our predicted model coefficients are performing. So this one is the actual one, and I don't know what is. Maybe I was trying something here. So yeah. So till here, any doubt? I think we don't have. Actually, we have some time, so I would like to show you one more thing. Like that was for EEG signal. In speech signal, we have something called EGG, electroglottograph. So what electroglottograph, similar to EEG, electroglottograph is also a biosignal, like that are recorded using electrodes and all. It's like EEG is recorded using electrodes. Like we have 128 electrodes spread across the human head. So similar to that, electroglottograph is also a biosignal that is used to check the vibrations that happen in the glottis. So we put certain electrodes and we tell human to speak, and according to that, how the vibration is there, that each electroglottograph is recorded. So I'll show you. Like this is one of the speech signal, and its corresponding electroglottograph is this one. I will show you. I will zoom it and I will show you. So this is the speech signal and its corresponding electroglottograph. So as I said, like for a frame, if you see for a frame, it's like as I already explained, there is a periodic vibration, right? So since it is periodic, you can say it's kind of sinusoid. It's although it's increasing, it's kind of a periodic signal only. If you see this, right? So that is what I was saying, that it's a periodic signal in a small frame. So EGG gives a better good proof that yeah, the vibration in our glottis is periodic. So how do I just there's a one well-known data set, CMU-RT, that gives along with the speech signal, it gives the electroglottograph also. So this one is EGG, should be EGG. Yeah, that's it, and yeah, that's it for the tutorial. Any questions? Then I can take that.
Can you please again explain this mean model coefficients? That output
Yeah.
is how to read this thing, how to understand this one.
Okay. So we can like coefficients that are mentioned here. So the coefficients that are mentioned here are basically the weights of the linear regression model. Okay, so that is what we get here after the curve fitting. We have used this fit rf.fit, right? And we are given the input and the predicted and the true output that we want. So according to that, we get the coefficients, the rf coefficients. So those coefficients are basically the weights of the linear regression model, and also we have varied the delay, like for different delays that we put in the model. With respect to all the 40 delays, we get different coefficients. Now what we want is, we want to see at which delay the speech fires. According to which delay the speech fires. If you see here, we have plotted here the delay and the channel, and according to which delay we get the most firing in the brain, which regions of the neurons get fired up. So that is what this coefficients mean. Like that's the main importance of this coefficients, that if we get the delay here, we will use those coefficients to regenerate the EEG signal.
Okay, for each delay, we are finding this model parameters or coefficients, and we are plotting like this.
Correct. And for
Also,
that,
it is in continuous range or with some interval.
Interval.
Some interval, obviously.
It's an interval, yeah, obviously, because otherwise it will be an infinite thing.
Infinite. Okay. Thank you.
So I think we didn't have no further questions. Does anybody have any other question?
Ayush,
Yes, sir.
I have a basic question.
Yeah.
I'm facing some issue while importing that MNE library.
MNE. Okay, so
The
what
first-
exactly the issue is?
Just I was executing that cell where you are importing the MNE library in the beginning.
This one?
Wait a minute.
So first we have to install that library.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So for that you just write pip install MNE space matplotlib.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think that was all. I didn't do that.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So is any other question? Yeah. So I think nobody have any other questions. So we are closing the session for today. We will meet you tomorrow at 2 p.m. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Attendance sheet.
Yeah, attendance.
Yeah, I will share now.